which we need to know about. So we've had it where that doesn't get identified up front, and then later we ask for it, and it can be an issue, or that could have been dealt with earlier in the process.
What should we call it? Severed?
Severed mineral interest, so if the mineral rights were bought out by someone else from the land, that's generally something we want to figure out and make sure that someone doesn't think they can come in and mine in a wetland bank.
So that's bullet number 2 on there, I think,
Oh.
is what I was getting at.
Gotcha.
But you explained it better,
Yep.
so. The point is, you need to make sure that when you ask for that title opinion, you're getting enough, they're looking at all the things that could come up. And I've been doing this job for various organizations or employers for 20 years. It's amazing how many problems have come up with title searches on various projects. It's a big deal. You have a question?
Yeah, why don't you want stormwater ponds within the easement?
Because stormwater ponds often require maintenance and activities around those to be worked on, and oftentimes they conflict with the prohibitions in the easement, and we want to use a template easement that's the same for each bank, so we try not to modify it to recognize certain things within there, so we just prefer to leave it out. Didn't like that answer?
Well, what if it's part of the plan or the hydrology for the project? It's a lot, you know.
So it's kind of pre-treatment for water that's going into the site? Yeah, I mean, what we do is we try to just pick up the easement boundary as close as we can to that outlet without getting into all the issues associated with it.
You just have a really odd boundary.
It can, yeah, we try to square them off as best we can, but we just kind of talked about it internally and just didn't want to have to deal with trying to accommodate those within the easement, because then you'd have to have potentially an extensive section on maintenance activities within the easement area that would have to be in the bank plan, and it just makes the bank plan more complicated. So we just made a decision to keep them out. Let's see, I think it was on the third bullet. Certificate of survey must be prepared to meet Bowser's very specific formatting requirements, which can be found on the Bowser website. This one is a very common problem. People get really antsy about getting their credits, and they go and get their survey done, and they drop the survey in, and they never look at our requirements on the website. Pay attention to those requirements, because they are very specific. And regardless of what your survey guy tells you, I know how to do this, I've been doing this for 20 years, look at our requirements, because they're just, it's a requirement to have all basically the same, so when they come in, our folks know what they're looking for in the review, and they're standardized. It's not terribly difficult to do, but you'd be surprised how many people do their own thing, and when you make them go back and redo it, it gets to be, there's a cost associated with that. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, if you want to have a surveyor submit a draft to us before they finalize it and put too much work into it, we're happy to review it and give our comments up front.
Does the Corps have a similar requirement?
The Corps is pretty much going along with what we're requiring.
Okay.
So when you get into easement acquisition, that's a good question. When you get into easement acquisition, for the most part, the Corps is deferring to us, because we're the vehicle for them. We accept the easement, which is what their program wants, and they become familiar enough with what we do that they're fine with it. So they just kind of back off, and if you notice, their instrument just says, you need to have a recorded easement to get your first credit release, and I think they need a copy of the title insurance that we get. And that's it. Other than that, they're typically not involved. The only time they may get involved is if during easement acquisition the boundaries move around a little bit, we'll probably let them know. But that's usually reconciled afterwards, because we know with easement acquisition that once the survey's done, those acreages may change a little bit. We've talked to the Corps about when we're going to go back and fix those for banks. Good question. Let's see, the Bowser approved certificate of survey must be attached to the title commitment. Therefore, applicants must wait to initiate the work until after obtaining Bowser's approval. Just kind of doing things in the right sequence there. This is one that's tripped up a few people. The title commitment must receive AG, which is Attorney General approval. So all our easements are reviewed by the Attorney General, usually on Friday mornings over at the Pine Street office, within 6 months of the effective date of the review. An effective date means what?
The date the title is searched from, so the date they start their search on the property.
So title commitments that do not receive AG approval within 6 months will need to be updated. And that's happened, right? I think we've run into that several times. And that's because,
Sometimes people want to work ahead and get the title commitment done right away before they even have the survey complete. And then other times there'll be an easement that they can't get confined because the utility company is unwilling to work with the applicant. And so that'll just drag out over 6 months, and they have to issue a fresh policy.
so I have some more slides on kind of future direction stuff, if you guys want to hear it. I've talked for an hour and 15 minutes, which is pretty long. I can keep going if you want, or I can just stop and take questions and end it there.
Future.
You guys
Yeah,
keep it.
keep going, yeah.
Keep going? Okay. I won't be offended if you get up and walk out before I get done, that's fine. Happens to me all the time, at home and at work. So some of the things looking at in the next 12 to 18 months with the program. So transition to use of an outline for the full plan draft instrument. So right now, there's I think I have a slide on this. Right now, there is a form that's on the webpage for full plan. We're getting rid of the fill-in form. We're going to provide you an outline that we want the full plan to be done according to that outline, that organization, and then there'll be a separate instruction document that will have what we're looking for section by section in that document. So you guys can take the outline, build your plan in accordance with the outline, and if you provide the information that we're asking for in there, you should have a great full plan. But the fill-in form and that for a full plan is just not working. So we're going to change that up a little bit. And we're working on that right now with the course. So that would satisfy everybody's requirements. I kind of talked about this earlier. We've talked about internally about trying to go to a 4-phase process for the state and feds. So under the state, the feds already have that. We've talked about switching a little bit to a 4-phase. So there might be a draft submittal of a full plan. Kind of gets at what I talked about earlier with that. How many of them go through without having comments and a resubmission or slipping pages in and out or something. So we're trying to recognize that's kind of de facto become part of the process and figure out a way where we can make that work where it's not such a back and forth without any structure to it. One of the big ones that's coming down the pike here is the in-lieu fee program development. And I also included that integration of high priority areas. So we have high priority areas in rural right now, and we've received some statutory authority to do more recognition of high priority areas. And we're kind of working that all into the in-lieu fee program because under the federal mitigation rule, I have a bunch of slides on this. To get an in-lieu fee program approved, we have to develop a compensation planning framework for each geographic area that the in-lieu fee covers. We're approaching that on a bank service area by bank service area basis. So compensation planning framework is essentially watershed-based mitigation plan. So we have to look at those bank service areas, and in order to get the in-lieu fee program approved for that area, we have to be able to tell the Corps and the other federal agencies, or the other agencies on the IRTs, not just federal, how we're going to go do site selection in that BSA if we accept funds and sell credits. How are we going to use that money to go target mitigation projects in those BSAs? And we're trying to take that compensation planning framework concept and really integrate it into the banking program in Minnesota so that we have some planning done for strategic site selection. So for instance, well, I'll get into that in a minute because I got a bunch of slides in that. Rulemaking that will address Bowser decision-making authority for wetland banks, alternative actions for credits, and BSA boundaries. So we started rulemaking actually before I came on board, but I think 2015 there were some statute changes that kind of led to the need for rulemaking. The agency's been fairly slow at actually moving with that, but we're going to have to pick up the pace here over the winter and work on that. And these are some of the topics that we're working on. So this year we received some statutory authority to let's just say revise how pre-settlement areas factor into mitigation decisions. So we can designate some BSAs as being greater than 80 or less than 80 statute. So try and simplify banking in terms of pre-settlement zones and get rid of some of this 50 to 80 and less than 80 stuff that complicates certain bank service areas. So that will be part of the rulemaking. That's something we're working with the Corps Alternative actions for credit, which came out of the statute changes in 2015. And then we're looking to clarify or develop the rules so that Bowser becomes the decision maker on wetland mitigation banks, which we got the statutory authority for in 2015. So that will really change how things work, because banks will then be approved by Bowser instead of local government units. They will still be involved, and the TEP will be involved in the review of these, but ultimately the decision will be made by Bowser on approval of wetland banks. And that's really a reflection of the complexity that's gone into banking, because a lot of the LGUs defer to us anyway in bank reviews, and they're just asking, we provide comments, and those comments get shipped right out. As various submittals come in, they're really asking us for a lot of technical support on that. So we're in a lot of areas, we're in the driver's seat anyway on bank approvals, and we're just going to formalize a process where we may be the ultimate decision maker. So you guys know what ILF programs are. Who knows what ILF is? Some of you? ILF, what does it stand for? Shout it out. In lieu fee, which means if you come to me and want to buy credits, I can sell you credits, but I haven't actually generated the mitigation site behind the credits. So I can take your money and your mitigation requirement is satisfied. I have to take that money then and go do a project within 3 years. And in lieu fee, whenever I'm talking about restrictions or requirements, it's really all embedded in the federal rule. So the federal rule is what's sort of governing all this. So I can take your money and I can go do the mitigation sometime down the road. And that's the major distinction between in lieu fee and banking. Banking, the credits have to be on the ground and approved before they're deposited. In lieu fee, I can sell you what's called advanced credits, which means I haven't done the project yet, but I'll take your money and I'll commit to go doing it. Make sense? So primarily, Bowser was looking at in lieu fee as primarily for the road program, because what we have is a shortage of credits. And when we get money from the legislature, it takes us 3 to 5 years or more to identify a project, design a project, get it approved, construct it, and start getting credits. In the situation we're in, that's too long of a window for us. We need to get credits within 12 months max on some of these bank service areas. So in lieu fee would allow us to do that. So we could, and for instance, in some of those bank service areas where I have a zero balance, if I had a road project come up, I could go, and if I got bonding money from the legislature, I could take some of that money, I could go buy myself credits from the in lieu fee. I could get those credits, I could take the money and put it in an in lieu fee account, and then I can do the same thing I always do in terms of going and generating a project. I can take that money, I can go identify a project, follow these steps, pay those credits back 3 to 5 years down the road, and I'm good to go. I got the road projects move forward, I do the mitigation with a lot of scrutiny from the Corps, and everyone's happy in the end. Yes?
Is it 3 years to identify a site or 3 years to complete the banking process?
It's 3 years really to start construction, start turning dirt. It's the way it plays out.
Is there any concern that with kind of an offset of banking timeline versus purchasing timeline, that there's going to be an issue coming up with enough credits for sites to address the credits that have already been paid for? So if there's not that much in a given area to be restored, and someone has already purchased X amount of credits, and you've taken their money, how can you, or the state, guarantee that there's going to be enough wetland restoration available or land available to purchase or restore to cover? I mean, I'm just seeing like with the offset, like there have to be some really careful accounting of like what land is available, and if we haven't even purchased it, how can there be a confirmation that that is going to be compensated?
That's a really good question, and it's one of the big uncertainties with ILF, and it's also one of the areas where ILF sponsors, if they're the same as bank sponsors, really have to develop some new skills in project management, accounting, and finance in terms of doing this, because you're exactly right. You collect money today to pay back X number of credits, and you're not going to do that until 3 years from now. How do you know that that money is going to produce the credits you're thinking? We're in kind of a unique position, Bowser is, because we've been doing projects for 20 years. So we actually have pretty good numbers of what it's gonna cost us to build projects. The part that you don't always know is, what are your inflationary rates with some of that to make sure that you're doing the accounting correct, or how much our land value is gonna change. But there's contingencies that we build into those to account for that. The other uncertainty I think you're getting at is, how do you know your site's gonna produce that number of credits for the money that you put into it? And that really comes down to site selection. And then you have to be pretty conservative with what you're doing to make sure you're gonna get good projects that are gonna produce. Those are really good points. There's just inherent uncertainty and risk in lieu fee. And there's a lot of scrutiny from the Corps and the other agencies over how you're spending money. And I think nationwide, in my discussions with lieu fee sponsors, these are the biggest problem areas they run into, is how can I make sure that I'm gonna get the credits I need for the money, or my price is right, am I doing this, that, and the other. So there's a lot of work that has to go into that. But we're lucky that we've been doing this work for a while, so we have a lot of good numbers behind us, and we have a lot of people that know good sites when they see them. So our in-house expertise will help us. We're concerned about the uncertainties, but we think we can manage it.
Do you think there's a point in time, and maybe this is like way too future to even think about right now, but where there is no more land to be purchased to be restored? Not enough people that want to sell it, not enough land that's actually restorable to wetland. Because when you're talking, I mean, obviously that could be a long ways out, but
I think all the farmers in the western side of the state are tiling wetlands right now to create banks in the future, so I think I mean, that's a fair question. I mean, I think you're talking a long time out, so could it happen? I guess, but these regulatory programs evolve. I think if you're gonna get to the point where nobody's willing to do that, you may also be at the point where no one's gonna impact anything either, potentially. There may not be anything left, or what's left is so rare, it's protected, and you don't dare impact it, so the need for mitigation may go away. I don't know, but I think that's beyond the Tim Smith planning horizon / lifetime, so I'll mention it to my sons that they can deal with it. Yeah.
Any comment on the need for contemporaneous replacement, and maybe there's a penalty, if you will, on the replacement ratio because
of the lag?
Loss of the resource
Yeah.
for some time period?
The temporal lag, as it's referred to in some. Yes, and that's something that has to be dealt with in the instrument, and that's a discussion with the Corps. There are some in lieu fee programs that tack on an additional increment to account for that. There are some that say it's an approved program in the federal rule, and that's just the way it operates, and there shouldn't be any increment to it. I think there's more people that are lined up towards, you probably need to account for that somehow with your ratios to make sure that you're accounting for that. Now, there's other people that will say, well, because you're doing this strategic planning and you're putting these sites in high priority areas, or you've identified these as being the best sites to do mitigation, that they should get a break on the credit ratio, because people are going into these high priority areas, and it could be Bowser or others, and targeting mitigation in these areas, and that should be better than somebody who's just randomly doing it, because they find cheap land somewhere, and therefore they should get a break on that. So do those offset? I don't know, that's a question that when we formally engage the Corps with review of our plan, or our program plan and instrument, we're probably going to have that discussion. And I've seen it go both ways across the country. It's a good question, though, and it's one that, I know in Wisconsin with their in lieu fee, they built it into the ratio. There's a temporal lag increment in there for in lieu fee credits. Yeah?
So states like Wisconsin and California that have in lieu fee for wetlands, or I think Ohio has it for like habitat mitigation. Do they have like periodic, maybe every 10-year program reviews where they can see how their forecasting is matching up?
Most of the program reviews are annual. At least when the in lieu fees first get operational, there's annual reviews, and then I think with the Wisconsin one, They set it up that there's annual reviews, and then if it's running efficiently, they back off and might do it every 2 years or something like that. But initially, there's a lot of scrutiny on those. I think our proposal was we were looking at doing, the first couple of years, we would provide them semi-annual reports, so we would do a little bit more frequently. Any other questions? Yeah, John?
I guess the concern would be a lot of the technical staff that you have that are going to be working on these also are the ones that actually provide the comments for the private banking program. I'm wondering, is that going to slow down the private banking program if you got a lot of the technical experts working on these bank projects?
I guess potentially you can see more demand on their time, yeah. I think we anticipated that if we, with in lieu fee, if we start doing it this way, we would just have to staff up, particularly in engineering, and we're already doing that, adding some more engineers in to help with some of the workload, and particularly with what's going on with CREP and the increased demand on doing that sort of work. But yeah, I mean, we try to keep the project, we call it project development side of our staff that works on them, separate from the reviewers. So we do have kind of a distinction there with the exception of engineering. Yeah?
It's also, you know, is it a third party or is it the consultant that's actually evaluating mitigation success? In terms of under vegetation, no, in general.
In general?
In general.
Well, the bank sponsor is responsible for the monitoring. So they would probably have a consultant submitting the reports and doing the monitoring, and those are then evaluated by the agency.
Is that a conflict of interest perhaps, or?
For who? The agency staff?
Well, no, I mean, if the person's funding it, they're the ones who are responsible for coming up with the data. Would that be viewed as a conflict?
So,
You know, so is
if I'm
anyone
a
checking-
bank sponsor,
Right, is
and
anyone
I hire
checking-
you to go out and do my monitoring, and you submit it to John, who's an agency guy, is there a conflict because I'm paying you to get the data on my behalf for him to review?
Right,
it?
well, and have you looked at those, well, maybe looking at it a little finer, where some of these consultants are actually part of the proposing these mitigation projects. Is there a conflict there?
I don't see a conflict, because the agency staff are all doing the reviews of these. And most often that includes a site visit, and they're checking data sheets and they're checking information to make sure that it's accurate. So there is a certain amount of, call it quality control or oversight about what's being prepared.
Sure.
But certainly a bank sponsor is hiring somebody that's going to do the work on their behalf. So I mean, if you could construe that as a conflict, perhaps, but.
Well, I mean, there's always the devil's advocate.
Right, yeah.
So-
I mean, it's the same as a consultant preparing the bank plan and putting information in there because they're trying to get the agencies to approve it. So I think it's more, that's the way the process works, you know? And I mean, what would the alternative be in that case? That the agencies go out and collect the data and do the reviews independent of what the bank sponsor?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, you know, just that there has to be some sort of official safeguard. You know, and what are we, you know, take it from people who work in actual natural systems, and then you're trying to recreate these things, and then you have those people look at that, and their opinion of success is going to be a lot different.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, that's why we argue over performance criteria.
There is I mean, there's checks and balances, because anytime you want to actually do a formal deposit, I mean, last time I did a review, last week, I had 3 people from the Corps out on site. I had the LGU, and I had 1 person from Bowser and a person from Bowser training, so I had 6 people. So, I mean, there's enough checks and balances, I think, because you're going to have a number of the tap in the Corps out to the site to look at it before you get any sort of deposit.
Yeah, I'm just curious because it's something we don't do.
Okay. Well, trust me, one try it out. There's plenty of checks and balances.
Yeah, and I would say the same thing, ideally should apply more, for instance, a consultant for a developer is also serving as a consultant for the local LGU, which I'm sure is the case for some folks in this room. That's, I think, people have to put a lot of faith in the CUP system, that the other folks involved in reviewing the application will step up and give their full attention.
And I can say based on my experience, and I worked for the Corps in California and North Carolina, and I did some regulatory work in Michigan when I got to graduate school. I've not worked in an area with more agency involvement and oversight than Minnesota.
That's good for business.
I mean, it's not even comparable, even in California where, you know, they keep an eye on everything. You go to a meeting in California and people show up out of the woodwork from organizations and agencies they didn't know existed. But in terms of the involvement and the attention to detail and scrutiny in Minnesota, it's unprecedented in my opinion. And they're very active here, there's a lot of folks involved, and it's a good thing and it's a bad thing. I mean, it's a very strong state program relative to a lot of other states. With the PCA, the DNR, and Bowser, there's a lot of scrutiny over what goes on. That's good for the state in terms of its resources. When you have a federal program also that's in there doing its thing, there's some inefficiencies there because the state program's so strong. And the state feds haven't really worked things out to be as efficient as they could. But all in all, it works pretty good. And it's a good relationship, and it's good for the resources. It's tough to work through sometimes, but the alternative is, like in some states I've worked in, there's no state program. And there are state people who come out on site, their authority is so limited, you wonder why they made the drive. It's a little different in Minnesota. Yeah, question?
Just, I don't know if it's a comment or question. I started, back in the early 90s when we had the interim rules. Basically, it was Bowser telling us, hey, go do the best you can. And those were some of the best weapons that I've ever created. And it's because it forced me to be on site with the grader, with the developer, with the seeder throughout the process. And then we got the one-page form, and they started having us put in questions that, answers to questions that nobody ever looks at. And then you get a bigger form, and we got a bigger form, and then we're in this process.
Yeah.
And I still find that people are getting so into the form, the specifics, they're losing track to the creativity and really what makes a project successful. And I like what I hear from you a little bit in the lumping instead of splitting some of the guidance. And I think sometimes people get too caught up in things that just don't matter.
Yeah.
Don't focus at all on the stuff that does matter, which is be there on site watching it. And if you're there, you fix a lot of things. And you can get very creative. For instance, I've never walked through a wetland that I don't trip and fall. Milton County, they call it either Tony or something like that. I don't know, they make fun of me. And, just making a wetland lumpy, bumpy,
Yeah.
different soils, all this type of stuff. You can make something better that way, as opposed to worrying about all these little things that once you put it in the data sheet, nobody does anything. Get rid of them. Just stop it. And I do hear people like, do we care about the leg, 3-year leg? Do we? I don't know. Why do we get worked up about stuff like that? Let's make it a good one. So that's just my, I don't know if that's a comment or a direction or what it is. The more you can get rid of
There's a lot to be
crap,
said for that. I mean, I think organizational theory, I think bureaucracies tend to continue to increase detail and process. And at some point, you got to sit back and look at, is there any value in some of the stuff that we're doing? My take on it, not representing Bowser or saying anything bad about any agencies, but we've created a lot of requirements, and there's a lot that goes into these things. There's a lot of detail. It's not only the plan preparation, it's afterwards. There's a lot of detail. So is it all really necessary? We're kind of revisiting some of that right now.
hope so.
Who else had a question? Anyone? Yeah.
How are you setting in lieu fee pricing so you're not undercutting private bank owners?
Let me respond to that in 2 ways. One, our pricing is, the requirement in the federal rule is it's got to be real cost accounting. So it's what it costs us to do projects. So for us, we have all that data to fall back on in certain parts of the state, what it costs us to do these things. So, and then there's some contingencies applied there. And in lieu fees that's the one part of wetland mitigation that's really scrutinized by the Corps. The Corps, the federal agencies, don't get any of the business on banking about what you're charging. You can charge whatever you want. They stay hands off. But the agreement with Inland Fee is that it's done by NGOs and governmental agencies because there is no profit motive. So you're basically doing these to get your costs back out. So there's that part of it. As far as the competition, I didn't show this slide, but we do not want to compete with private banking in Minnesota with the Inland Fee. We don't want to do that. The banking market is strong and healthy here. We don't want to affect that. What we want to do, though, is be out there as a fallback if there aren't bank credits available in certain BSAs. And this is kind of a hierarchy for decision-making for permitting authorities or LGUs under WACA about how they would look at identifying sources of mitigation. And if you follow it from top to bottom, you're looking at deposited credits of the same type from the same BSA. So deposited means those are actual credits. So it's like a wetland bank has deposited credits. Those are on the landscape. And advanced credits, and this one here, are those ILF credits where it's just the money's come in, but we haven't done the project yet. So there's a preference, if you follow the hierarchy, for deposited credits from banks. So you have deposited credits of the same type from the same BSA, deposited credit, and then if you don't have any there, you drop down. Deposited credit of a different type from the same BSA. If you don't have that, you drop down. A deposited ILF credit. So that is a credit. ILFs can generate credits that are on the ground that haven't been sold yet. And those get treated essentially the same as bank credits. But in this sort of draft hierarchy we put together for the Corps to consider, we knock those down a couple spots on the hierarchy for bank credits. So we're trying to preserve that favoritism toward banking. And then the ILF only steps in when you don't have those credits that are available. Now the topic of discussion is how this gets factored into a project specific, because project specific gets put way down on the priority list. So that could change in the discussions with the Corps, but our emphasis is on not competing with private banking. Does that make sense?
That'll be part of the new rulemaking? Or part of the ILF?
It will definitely be part, we're proposing it as part of our program instrument for the ILF to the Corps. Is that we think this is how it would be, how we would manage sale of credits from the ILF to private, outside of the road program. So the ILF will service the road program, kind of like how the road program is always chugged along. But if we want to sell credits out on the private market to individuals outside the road program, we were thinking something like this is what would govern how we do it. Yeah. Well, let me stop you. We're way over now, so
Okay.
I'll keep answering questions as long as you have, but don't feel like you need to sit here.
Okay. The question is, why not just replacing a wetland for a wetland? Why such a big concern on type? Because what that does is it sort of drives maybe to types that really shouldn't be there on the landscape. Restoring it back to the more type that it should be is, you know, because what you're going to do if you say you want more type 2s, you're going to drive people to make type 2s, even though really on the landscape it should be a type 3 or 4. So I guess.
Well, that's a reflection of the system we have right now. That's why it's up there.
Yeah, but
it's basically, and it's a result of the 404 program, emphasis on type being in kind.